Okay, so today we're doing a sequence I like to call the pendulum, and this moves our femur, which is our thigh bone, through its 6 articulations. And basically the reason for doing this is our bodies are basically use it or lose it. So when we don't move our thigh through all its possible ranges of motion to its limits, then what can happen over time, especially as we get a little older, is we won't be able to do that anymore. And some of you may even be able to remember being younger and being able to do like a full split. And then maybe you tried it in your 20s or your 30s and you can't do it anymore. So this is an example of what I'm talking about. It's not to say that if you didn't practice doing the splits, you wouldn't be able to regain that ability. Possibly you could. Also, sometimes our bodies just change on a fundamental basis, but generally speaking, once we're adults, if we don't continue to use our joints and our muscles, they atrophy and they become weak, they can become damaged, or they can just stop working the way they're supposed to. So a great example of this is called frozen shoulder syndrome. And this is where usually an elderly person, again, it speeds up as you get older, this process. Elderly person breaks their arm, so they set the arm in a cast and they put it in a sling, you know, like grandma, grandpa, and they don't move their arm for a few weeks while the bone sets. Then they take the cast off, they get rid of the sling, and grandma can't lift her arm anymore. Okay, her shoulder is frozen. And the reason that happened is because she didn't use her shoulder for a few weeks. Now again, this is an extreme example, and this is for elderly people, but it happens for all of us, whether we realize it or not. You know, when we try and stretch, and we haven't stretched in a while, we feel really stiff. That's the beginning of this process happening, okay? So keep that in mind. We're going to start with something maybe a little bit intense, but again, all of what we're doing is for the purpose of articulating our joints. So we don't want to think of it as, oh, this doesn't feel good. We want to think of it in terms of, okay, I'm articulating my joints. That's why I'm doing this. There's a purpose behind it. All right, so let's start with a bear pose. We come onto all fours. It's also called marauding bear. And our idea is just to move and warm up the muscles of the torso, the joints in the spine. A lot of joints in your spine. I think it's like 76. You have 33 bones, but almost for every bone you have 2 or 3 joints. Okay, so we're just trying to warm up those tissues, get them moving, get some fluids moving into those tissues. And then when you're done with that, you can tuck your toes and come into a down dog, just walking out your dog. So we're not trying to hold still or anything here. We're going to move a bit. Stretch things out. Okay, and then we come into our first posture, which again is the most active posture for today's class. Bring that left foot forward. Bring our right knee to the ground. And we'd like the hips as far forward and down as they'll go, which means that if you can rock your hips forward more, do that. Do that until they won't go forward anymore. Now again, that may not feel awesome. It doesn't for me, but we want to be sure we're not hurting or injuring ourselves. So remember, there's a difference between discomfort and injuring yourself or hurting yourself. Discomfort, it's going to happen, but sharp pains, things like that might mean you're actually hurting yourself. Okay. So once you're here, a key element to this is raising the torso up and back. We generally want the left foot under the knee. We want the right knee on the ground. Okay? Now, it's not our intention to try and be uncomfortable here. So What that means is if your right knee does not like being directly on your mat or on the ground, then just add a little bit of padding. Put something underneath there, double fold your mat, okay? Now, what I'd like you to feel is a stretch right here. These are called your hip flexors, right here at the front of this hip. Now, as a group, they run down and cross the knee joint, come up, cross the hip joint, and then come back and attach to the spinal discs up along your spine. So the hip flexors have a very intimate relationship with the back and back pain. So we can think of them as simply as hip muscles, but it could also be thought of as spine muscles. They're affecting our spine and our back as well, okay? So this is why before I learned anatomy and started studying this stuff when I became a yoga teacher, it didn't make any sense to me when people would say that your hips have an effect on your back, or the flexibility of your hip would have an effect on your back. But now that I've studied this stuff, it does make sense. So if you're someone with chronic back pain, or even intermittent back pain, you might find that this stretch actually can help. Now, stretching is one half of the equation. The other half is strengthening. So this class, again, the stretch class, if you will, the stretch yoga class, is one half of what we want to do. We want to do the class on Monday as well, where we do the more active strengthening things. And generally speaking, as a teacher, I find my stretch class is much more popular, it's much more accessible, it's much easier, because strengthening generally is more intense and it's harder and it requires a little more discipline and you might say willpower. But we need that as much as we need the relaxation and we need the stretching. So again, the name of this style of yoga is yin yoga, and it's one half of a complete yoga practice. It's the stretching part, the lengthening part. In the other class, we stretch as well, but there's much more strengthening involved in that. Okay, let's go ahead and switch sides. Take your time with that. You can come through a tabletop, which is what I'm doing today, but down dog works just as well. Now again, when I'm doing this properly, I should feel a stretch at the front of my left hip. Okay, if you don't feel that, well, you want your hips further forward and down, your torso further up and back. Now, as you can see, your hands can be in many places. You could put your hands here. Some people like the hips. I just like to rest my elbow on the knee here. And again, the main thing is I feel that stretch at the front of my hip. Now today, for whatever reason, it's really intense. The sensations I'm feeling are really intense. If I were new to this, I might actually be alarmed by those sensations. And it may actually cause me to come out of the pose or to ease up on it some. So this is like your first time doing this posture, or you're new to this, then you may need to do those things just to be sure that you're safe. And safety is super important for us. We don't want to ever do something with the intention of making ourselves healthier and in the process actually injure ourselves, which can happen. This happens to people all the time. People working out generally are trying to be healthier, and yet, you know, people injure themselves all the time. Runners, weightlifters, CrossFitters, they can hurt yogis, people doing yoga as well. So we need to keep our intention in perspective, that we are trying to live happier and healthier lives. And if we're too aggressive, too careless, then we can actually end up with the opposite result. The flip side of that is some people approach yoga with too much fear, and they're too conservative and too cautious. And when that happens, we actually don't get as much benefit as we could from doing our practices. So like with so much in life, there is a balance there. There's a balance there that we need. We want to be safe, but we can pursue safety to the point where we're actually hurting ourselves. We're actually hurting ourselves. And one example of this, and please don't take anything I'm saying personally, but one example of this in modern times is a trend lately that where parents sort of hover over their children all the time, and that's called helicopter parenting. And the intention of every parent is to raise a healthy, happy child. But what some of the studies that have been done have found is that actually makes the children unnecessarily dependent on the parents, where they can't really think for themselves, and they're overly cautious. They're always looking at their parents for, is this okay? Am I doing the right thing? And that can be problematic once we become adults. So again, everyone's intention in doing yoga is to be happy and healthy and heal their body and make their body strong but flexible. But if we're not careful, we can end up doing the opposite of that. Okay, let's go ahead and come on out of that. Make our way onto our back. I'm just going to relax for a few moments. This is called a rebound. Okay, let's bring our legs in. Give them a little stretch, the leg cradle. Let's move around a little bit. Our intention here is just to bring some relief to the body, moving and stretching a bit. And then to come up to seated, we'll engage the hip flexors and the abdominals. This will help strengthen them ever so slightly. And by engaging them, we'll help pull the hip joint back in, which is the opposite of what we were doing. We're just kind of stretching it out. And it does the same with the spine. So we slide our hands under our hips like this with the palms down, just creating a little platform for our sacrum, so our sacrum isn't pressing into the ground directly. Take the legs straight up, but if you find there's pain in your back, then you can bend your knees as much as you need to till that pain goes away. Then we lift the head and neck, take a nice deep breath in, and as we exhale, we lower the legs toward the ground. Just before they touch the ground, we pause, and then inhale, pull the legs up and let the weight of the legs pull you up to seated. Okay, so this is pendulum. I call this sequence the pendulum because we move the femur, which is the thigh bone, back and forth, opposite directions. So that was called hyperextension. Now what we'd like to do is called flexion. Bring our right leg out straight. Take the left foot to the inside of the thigh. And then we just relax the upper body forward and down. I'm not making any attempt to go deeper or further than gravity is taking me as I relax. Okay? You notice I'm not pointing my foot in any particular direction. It's just relaxed. That's where it goes. I'm also not making an attempt to keep my spine straight. If you'd like a little support here, you could take a block or a blanket under your left knee. You could put 2 blocks under your forearms or a block on your forehead. When I say block, I mean yoga block, obviously. And you could also try sitting on something, and that might push you forward a little more aggressively. Check in, make sure you feel safe. And be sure you feel the stretch in the back of your right thigh. Okay, let's switch sides. And yin again, we call this half butterfly. Okay, come up, gradually make our way onto our back. We'll relax for a few moments and rebound. All right, let's bring our legs in, give them a little squeeze. Again, it's the leg cradle. We use that to release pent-up tension and compression. You may not feel like moving much, but I'm gonna encourage you to move during this stage, because this, again, helps us balance all that stillness in the yin postures. So we just wanna move, try different things out. And then we'll go ahead and hinge on up, same as last time. Okay, now we'll come into tabletop just briefly, and we do the kickstand. So you may want to come over to the left side of your mat. You may also want to pad your left knee. So if your knees are sensitive, then put a blanket or a towel, or double fold your mat, something like that, okay? So we take the right leg straight out to the right like a kickstand. It's the name of this pose. And again, my foot can point in pretty much any direction that it wants to or needs to. I can point or flex it. What I'm looking for is a stretch that is right in here. These are the adductor muscles, also known as the groin. Okay, so if I feel the stretch there and I feel safe, then the pose is working. My left foot could be flexed or pointed. It could be pulled in toward my buttocks or back behind my knee. My hips can be over the knee or pressed back toward the heel. I can be up on my hands, I could be down on my forearms, or some people even lay on their belly. And all of these are potentially right ways to do the pose, and all of them are potentially wrong ways to do the pose. And whether it's right or wrong depends on your body, your injuries, your age, your flexibility, how often you practice yoga. All of these things are going to factor in, okay? So this idea of here's the right way to do the pose and it's the right way for everybody just really is, in my opinion, a bit of a dangerous idea, even though it's a popular idea. A popular idea in the past was that the earth was flat. It didn't mean that it was right. We human beings can jump on board with an idea. It doesn't mean that that idea is going to be correct or right. So the idea that there's one right way to do the postures and it's based on how the pose looks, to me, is a dangerous idea. And we want to realize that everyone's body is different. And the most important thing for me and what I was taught is how the poses feel. So we're having a stretch here and we feel safe while we're stretching, okay? Okay, let's switch to the other side. Take your time. You might feel really, really sensitive. And need to take a minute to make that transition. So by all means, honor what you feel that your body needs here. Okay, so you'll notice that I'm flexing my foot, I'm pointing the toes up. I'm doing that just because it seems to give me a better stretch today. Tomorrow that might be very different, the way that I do this pose. This is one pose that for me, it does tend to vary quite a bit from day to day, week to week. There are other poses that I more or less do in almost exactly the same way every time, and they work. And so this is just an example of what I'm speaking about. All of our bodies are different, and our body changes. It changes from day to day, even within one day. If you practice yoga a lot, you may have had the experience of not being able to do something in the morning, and then in the evening or in the afternoon, you're able to do that very same thing with your body. So, did you switch bodies? Do you have a new body? No, your body just has changed within that 12 or 8 hour period. So this is the reality of our experience as human beings. All right, please take your time making your way out of that. And we will just again make our way back onto our back to relax, okay? All right, let's bring the legs in, give them a little squeeze, shake it out. And when you're ready, hinge on up to seated. All right, so that movement was called abduction, when we bring our femur out to the side there. So what is the opposite of that? It's called adduction. With adduction, what we'd like is to bring the right knee to the left. And so I do that like this. And if I can, I bend this knee, bring this foot back over here. This is called a shoelace. Now, this is actually half shoelace. And this is one way you can do this. It tends to be more of a hamstring stretch than anything. So if possible, we bring this foot back as well, like so. For some people, it's very helpful to sit on something because without that, they feel like they're being pushed off to the side or their knee is way up in the air like this. So if that's you, then maybe try sitting on something, maybe just something like a folded blanket. A yoga block might be a little bit too much. And then we'd like to just come forward and down. Now, if none of the options I'm giving you so far work, my recommendation is do this on your back. Come onto your back and just pull with your hands. Pull your feet and knees in toward you and across, using the opposite hands to pull the leg across. And that's called a supine shoelace. Whichever version we're doing of the posture, we are adducting our femurs, and that's going to stretch the abductors on the outside of the hip. Okay, so let's go ahead and come on up and we'll make our way over to the other side. Again, for me today, this is quite an intense posture. I've had trouble with my left hip for a while now, and right now that hip is relatively sensitive. It's better than it's been in the past, but it seems to get better, and then it might get a little worse again, and then it gets better. I feel that slowly, gradually, it is healing, but right now I'm going through a period where it's very sensitive, and in this posture, I'm really, really feeling that sensitivity today. So again, really want to kind of honor our edge and what our body can handle. And one way I'll handle that is just by rolling away from my left hip a little bit. So it just takes some of the pressure off so that my body can relax. Okay, we come back up, and then gradually we make our way back onto the back, again to rest and relax for a few moments in the rebound. Good. Let's bring our legs in, give them a little squeeze. We have 2 more sets because we have 2 more articulations for the hips. Again, these come in pairs, opposites, if you will. All right, when you're done with that, we go ahead and hinge on up to seated. And what we'd like now is to come into a tabletop once again, just like we did at the beginning of our practice today. And we can again move our hips and spine around. Very different experience for me than the first one we did. Because again, we've stretched, my body is warmed up, and then certain parts of my body have been stressed. So I'm not saying it necessarily feels easier or better. In fact, some areas may be more sensitive than they were at the beginning. Again, we come into down dog a little bit. I definitely feel more warmed up here. This is definitely easier than before. And then now we come into sleeping swan. So right knee toward right wrist. The right foot comes to the left side of the mat. The hips are down. And you could stay up here if you like. We'd like to feel it out here, and we'd like the knee and the ankle to be free of any kind of duress. Okay, the hips can rock to the left or the right. The knee can point straight ahead or out to the right. Your right foot could be closer to your left hip or be pulled closer to the front edge of your mat. The closer the foot comes to or your shin bone comes to a right angle or parallel with the front edge of your mat, generally the deeper the rotation here. You have 3 joints that are being stressed here. Only one is the target of the pose. So this joint, the hip joint, is the target of the posture. But the knee and the ankle will have to be under at least some stress in order for us to put the hip into stress, which is what we want. Again, good stress is called use stress, and that's what we're trying to create here. So, because we are stressing the knee and the ankle, and statistically speaking, these are the most injured parts of the body in any type of exercise, including yoga, we need to be very careful with what we're asking that joint to do, what those joints to do. So if I cannot get a nice satisfying stretch here without putting my knee and ankle at risk, then I just need to accept that. That's just the limitations of my practice today. Now there may be a way to modify the posture such that you can get a stress here without hurting the knee or the ankle. And if you'd like more help with that, just reach out to me and I'd be happy to show you some alternatives, okay? Just take your time and switch sides. Okay, so let's again unwind and rest for a few moments. We have just one more set left here. All right, we'll bring our legs in, give them a nice little squeeze. And then let's hinge up to seated. Okay, our final articulation is called internal rotation. And some people have really, really limited internal rotation. The way I do that is with what's called a half saddle pose. This is the minimum position, the minimum rotation. In fact, my thigh is not really rotated at all in this position. I can see because I can see my knee, the angle of my knee. Okay, so what we'd like is to be able to put our foot and leg in a similar position without hurting the foot, the ankle, or the knee. So if your foot is, if you have bones that are pressing into the ground, then add some extra padding under your foot with a blanket, or again, double fold your mat. If your knee is hurting, there are a few things you can try. Sitting higher, so this is where a yoga block can be really helpful, or changing the angle. The knee tends to be under less stress at an angle. The other thing I can try is, for some people, myself included, this is a less stressful position for the knee. So this is how I'll do the posture. Now, because we're interested in rotation, when I went from here to here, I increased the rotation already in my hip. And I'd like to maximize that. So today I'm going to move my foot away from my hip, and right about there is my personal limit, because again, more than that, I start to feel it in my knee, and I have no interest in destabilizing my knee doing this posture, okay? And I do feel a little bit in my hip, but even though I might want more in my hip, if I push my foot out further, I'm going to get more in my knee, and my knee will give out before my hip will. Okay, so I'm not going to go there. I'm just not going to do that. Now, you can stay where you are. Make sure your ankle and your knee, your foot are all happy. Or if you like, you can lower back onto your back. Onto your hands, your elbows, or maybe onto a bolster all the way back onto your back. It's really up to you. Okay? Now, I have quite a bit of internal rotation and what's called tibial rotation. And that's why my leg and my foot are in this position. I've always had that. That's what I'd like to really communicate with you. It doesn't make me better or worse than someone else. It means that I'm better at certain things and worse at other things. It's just sort of that's how the body is. It's usually a trade-off. Someone who would make a great ballerina would make a very poor heavyweight lifting champion. Someone who makes a great linebacker might make a very poor martial artist. Okay, so our bodies have certain gifts, and it's not one is better than another, but one might be better at certain things than other things. So in yoga, one of the things that can happen is, because of all the shapes and the focus on shapes, people can begin to think things like, I'm bad at yoga, Or they might see my leg and think, oh, how much yoga must he have done in order to be able to do that? I can't do that at all. Well, you may never be able to do this because your body just wasn't cut out that way. And it's neither good nor bad inherently that you can or can't do this. So my body's always been able to do this. And I'm just using my joints to their full capacity so that I can keep my joints healthy, strong, and resilient to injury. I am not trying to push myself beyond my limits. When I go to my limit, if there is restriction, then very often that restriction is released, and I might find my limit increases. This is why many people, when they start doing yoga, they start finding themselves becoming more flexible. It's just because there was superficial tension in the soft tissues of their body. Usually with repetition, that tension will release, and you'll come to your true full range of motion over time. But the idea that yoga is about flexibility and that we're all trying to become human Gumbies and twist ourselves into knots, this is a very prevalent and common misconception. Okay, switching sides. This is the half saddle pose. You may need to come up out of it. Most people probably do. It's easier for me just to stay on my back and switch legs. Okay, please take your time coming out of that posture. And again, we'll take a few moments to relax. Okay, drawing our legs in, give them a nice little squeeze. We shake it out, move around a little bit. And then this time we'd like to do something a little bit different. We unwind into what we call pentacle pose, which is just a comfortable position on your back. Your arms and legs really could be in any position that is relaxing and comfortable for you. You close your eyes, you still your body. And my recommendation is just set a timer for 6 minutes, which is 10% of our practice time. And if you can, just let your body be still for that 6 minutes and notice what happens. Feel your body, notice your thoughts, notice what emotions might come and go. Just for 6 minutes. It might feel like a really long time. But you'll learn a lot if you pay attention during those 6 minutes.